Sounds good. All right, I got it. So I think we should go as people will probably come in and out as they can join us. So welcome to all of you to the Burn Model System webinar on pediatric outcome measures in the Burn Model System database. I'm Dagmar Emtman. I'm the director of the BMS National Data and Statistical Center. Oh. And my arrow doesn't work to advance. Okay, so I have to use the clicker. All right, always something. All right, so
we can't see your slides.
You can't. Okay, because I didn't say share. Thank you. Share screen. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, well then I will.
You can display if you want. I'm just gonna keep going because everybody's familiar with this. I'm just gonna say that this is a part 4 of a 4-part webinar series related to the BMS database. Part 1 was the introduction to the BMS and the BMS National Database that Kara did, was approximately 17 minutes long. Part 2 was presented by Elisa Bamer, and it was a case study on the step-by-step of requesting BMS data. And I did part 3, and on adult outcome measures in the burn model system. And that is almost an hour long, and all of these are available. Are you sharing your screen, Kara?
Yes, I am now.
Okay, so you're gonna do that?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I'll try to get out of mine.
Sorry, I can't figure out how to let you share.
Yeah. And I can't figure out how to move the screen so that I'd be looking at you rather than at my screen here.
You can try it now,
I got
actually.
that. Okay.
If you can maybe
Yeah,
share now.
now it's green now, so it's allowing me to do that. Okay. Oh, but you're still running the slides, right? You're looking at my desktop.
Yeah, I can either run them or you can run them now, whichever you prefer.
Can I run them? Okay. Okay, you can see them now?
Yep.
All right. Okay, perfect. All right, my apologies for those technical difficulties. So now you can see where you can find the webinars if you would like to listen to them or go through them. It's on our website, and here is the link to it. So what we cover in this webinar, I'm gonna talk very briefly about how we select pediatric outcome measures, and then most of our time is gonna be spent going over the individual outcome measures that we use for pediatric data collection. So let me start by saying a word about what the burn model systems is. It's a research study funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, and the program seeks to improve, through its research, care and outcomes for people with burn injuries. We currently fund, or NIDLR currently funds, 4 clinical centers and the data coordinating and coordinating center and statistical center, which is where I am located. So is Kara and Elisa, who presented the previous webinars. Our research programs, or the center's research programs, are housed in the clinical burn centers that provide the coordinated and multidisciplinary rehabilitation care, including emergency, acute, post-acute, as well as long-term follow-up services. Each of the 4 BMS centers conducts research and also contributes data to the burn model system national database, which the data center manages. The national database is a prospective, longitudinal, multi-center research study that examines health, functional, and psychosocial outcomes after burn injury. We have been collecting data since 1994. The BMS was funded in 1993, but did not start collecting data until 1994. And we collect data from adults and children with moderate to severe burn injury. To be eligible, the participants have to receive treatment at burn centers that are funded by NIDLR as part of the BMS program. If you want more information about burn model system, you can look at our first webinar. You can also look at our website, which has information about the BMS in general. So the types of data that we collect for the BMS database are of 2 kinds. One kind are individual questions that do not produce a standardized score. These questions are about patient demographics, pre-injury history, causes and injury characteristics, treatment-related variables, hospital discharge-related information, and for pediatrics, we collect school status after burn injury. The second type of data we collect are standardized measures. We call those patient-reported outcomes or person-reported outcomes, and we refer to those as PROMs. And we have several types of PROMs that we collect. That we ask questions about symptoms and other problems such as pain, anxiety, depression, PTSD. And we ask about health indicators, about physical function, satisfaction with life, and social health, and other health domains. So patient-reported outcome measures, or PROMs, sometimes they're referred to as person-reported outcome measures, are direct reports about how patients or persons are feeling and functioning without any interpretation by a third person or a third party. So this is a clinician reporting on behalf of a patient. This is patient reporting directly. PROMs are important because they are the only way that you can ask about the patient point of view, which patient and clinician often differ in their assessment of how the person is doing. So it's an important part of assessing person's function. The FDA requires PROMs for clinical trials because some treatment effects are only known to the patient, and systematic assessments of patient perspectives may provide valuable information that can be lost when the perspective is filtered through a clinician's or other person's evaluation. So for the adult outcome measures, you can look at the previous webinar that is posted on our website, and all of the links are provided in this PowerPoint. The BMS pediatric data collection collects data from children and youth, and we use both proxy report and self-report to collect pediatric data. We have proxy data collection only for children ages 0 to 8, We don't do self-report for obvious reasons. We start with 8 because it's typically the age when children can read and can provide questions to written, can provide answers to written questions. We collect both self-report and proxy report for children and youth ages 8 and 7 to 17. We don't have proxy available for all the domains we measure, so we have fewer proxy reports than self-reports. We carefully monitor the length of administration and trying to make sure that the time of administration is appropriate for children and youth. Right now, the self-report interview for pediatrics across all ages is 38 minutes, and the proxy interview takes about 24 minutes. We work very hard to lower the time as best as possible. We made some changes to our new data collection, which will hopefully reduce the current 38 minutes. In this table, you can see the health domain or area of health that we're measuring on the left side, and the specific measures we use to measure that domain on the right side. So I'm not going to read the table for you, but in terms of domains, we ask about global health, we assess depressive symptoms, anxiety, sleep, pain, peer relationships, general life satisfaction, community participation, each body image, mobility, anger, physical activity, family relationships, PTSD, and post-traumatic growth. And these are all standardized measures. We ask questions about a lot more health areas, but those are individual questions that we use. And this is a list of proxy data collection measures. So they parallel self-report, but we don't have all the self-reported areas. We don't have proxy measures for all of them. So there are a couple fewer than self-report. The first set of measures I'd like to talk about are the PROMIS measures. PROMIS stands for Patient-Reported Outcomes Measurement Information System. These measures were developed with funding from the National Institutes of Health, and it's a set of person-centered measures that evaluate physical, mental, and social health status in both adults and children. And they were specifically designed to be meaningful to assess health in both the general population as well as people living with chronic conditions and disabilities. PROMIS can be collected from children as early as age 8. There were some efforts to validate them for earlier ages, but in general, we start at age 8. All of these measures are free. There are many translations available. The Spanish translations are free. For other translations, there may be a fee. These measures have been used in hundreds of research studies. There are lots and lots of publications, all of which you can find at their website, which is healthmeasures.net. And these measures have also been used in clinics and clinical practice. All have well-documented reliability and validity. They have estimates of important change. If for some reason the estimate is not available, you can always use a half of standard deviation as an indicator of important difference. Important part is that all PROMIS measures have clear domain definitions and a clear conceptual framework. We care about that because without a domain definition, it's really difficult to interpret the score because you really don't know what you're measuring unless you clearly define it and make sure that all the questions are aimed at measuring that domain, that definition. PROMIS measures were developed using advanced statistical methods, including item response theory, and the scores that are provided are on a T metric. That means that they have a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 10. And for most of the measures, 50 represents the US general population mean. In this case, this is US pediatric population mean. The population norms are excellent. They are provided for the whole population, but also by sex, education, and age. For more questions and more than you want to know about PROMIS measures, you can visit the website healthmeasures.net, and that's how you also download and access the measures if you're interested in them. The way we score PROMIS measures is the way that they are recommended to be scored by PROMIS. So each response that the person provides, such as very much, somewhat, little bit, has been assigned a numerical value by the developers, in this case PROMIS. So for instance, very much is a 5, a little bit is a 3. These numbers are provided by PROMIS on the investigation version of the PDFs and in the user manuals. We score by summing these item scores, and then we convert these item scores to a T-score metric by using scoring tables that are provided by PROMIS, or you can use the online scoring service, which is free. The online scoring service allows you to score unique sets of items, or allows you to score when you have missing responses to items. As is recommended by PROMIS, we do not use the sum scores for any purpose. We always use the IRT-based T-scores. The sum scores have not been validated, and other than for some psychometric purposes, they should not be used. The instrument we use for pediatric data collection is called PROMIS 25 profile. So PROMIS profiles, there are several available, are actually a combination of the PROMIS measures that cover most important health-related quality of life domains. PROMIS 25 is the shortest of these profiles that have been developed for pediatric use, and it includes 4 items for each of the health domains that the profile measures. And these domains include mobility, fatigue, and pain interference, anxiety, depressive symptoms, peer relationships, and there is one item that is a numerical rating scale, 0 to 10. It is not an IRT-based item that assesses pain intensity. And here we provide the reference if you need more information and look at development article. Here's the reference for you to look up. The way we score PROMIS is that the higher score always indicates more of what is being measured. That is sometimes confusing because sometimes higher score is better and sometimes it's worse. So for instance, if we're scoring anxiety, depressive symptoms, pain, or fatigue, higher score actually means worse health. But for peer relationships and physical function, mobility, a higher score means better health. So this is what we see as most confusing to both clinicians and patients, is the understanding the direction of the score. PROMIS 25 profile produces 6 continuous IRT-based scores because it includes 6 short forms of 6 item banks, 4 items each, plus 1 item that provides categorical score that is 1 to 10 pain intensity. So here is what the PROMIS 25 self-report form looks like. You see that the time frame is in the past 7 days. And then for physical function, response options go from with no trouble to not able to do. And for the rest of the domains, the response options are of frequency. So from never to almost always. Typically, these items are very fast to respond to. They have low reading level requirements, and the filling them out is fairly quick, and people, including children and youth, have a pretty easy time responding to those. So I would just want to show you briefly why we prefer IRT measures, because we get this type of information that is not available for classical chest theory measures, even though there are many classical chest theory measures that are excellent, that have been used for decades and work very well. So what you're looking at here is, this is a function of reliability. So it tells us how little noise there is in the score. And we care about noise in the score because if the score is not reliable, or in other words, it has a lot of noise in it, it is difficult to find a smaller treatment effect. You will need more people to find a smaller treatment effect that is there. And so clinical trials or studies need to enroll more participants to achieve appropriate power. So score reliability is very important in studies. And what is recommended is that reliability is a minimum of 80% for group mean comparisons. For individual comparisons, comparing progress in one person, the minimal reliability recommended is 90%, 0.9. So here, the blue line here is the recommended reliability for group comparisons, and the red line here shows you where the mean population score is. So your average Joe Schmo in the population is expected to have a score around 50 here. What you're looking down here is a histogram of people in the sample that we use to generate this graph. And what you see is that the most people's response was not at all, or very little pain interference in this case, or very little depression in this case. So this is what we expect, because in the general population, most people do not report moderate to significant levels of pain interference or depression. And then we have this distribution down here of people who report at least some pain interference or depression. So what this tells us, we're measuring with sufficient reliability from about half a standard deviation below the mean on pain interference, all the way to about 2.3 standard deviation at the other end of the continuum, that means people who have more worse pain interference. So all of these, most of the people in this distribution are well measured by these scores with good reliability. On depression, we don't start measuring above 80% reliability until about the mean. So the people who are below the mean, we don't really describe very well, and we can't differentiate very well between people who have very little depressive symptoms and very, very, very little depressive symptoms. So clinically, this is not a problem. We don't really have to worry about people who have very little depressive symptoms, but we're doing a good job measuring people with sufficient reliability who are from about the mean level to 2.5 standard deviations above the mean. So that is a very good coverage in the area of the continuum that is very meaningful for clinical purposes. So we're going to switch now to a different domain. So this measure measures itch in pediatric people. The BMS developed this measure because there was no measure of pediatric itch available that we could use. So we developed two IRT-based scales that produce IRT-based scores. One is for each interference self-report and one for each interference proxy. The self-report and proxy parallel each other, so they're basically the same questions used in a different way, because one asks the person how they are feeling, and the other asks a different person how their child is feeling. So we chose the candidate items following the methodology that was developed by Promise for measure development. We used expert panels, and then we also used cognitive interviews with children and youth to make sure that the items are understandable and meaningful. We assess the agreement between proxy and self-report, and we produce these two scales that are available for anybody to use and can be downloaded from our website. And here is the reference if you need to look up more information. Here is what the scales look like. So you see the same time frame. It asks about past 7 days, and the response options ask about frequency of experiencing certain difficulties related to itch. General life satisfaction is a slightly different instrument. It's IRT based. It was developed by NIH Toolbox. It can be administered by computerized adaptive test. For our purposes, we administer a short form that has 4 items. If you need more information about development of this scale, here is the reference. Just like with all the NIH Toolbox, Promise, NeuroQual scales, the scores are provided on a T-score metric. The score theoretically range from 0 to 100, with the higher score indicating more satisfaction with life. It is free to use, and you can download it from the NIH Toolbox website. Here's what it looks like. It has 4 questions. The response options are from strongly disagree to strongly agree, which is response options we don't usually recommend, especially not for children, but because the questions are fairly simple, and because this was developed to parallel the adult version, they decided to stick with this response option. There is no time frame, so this is kind of asking about how you're feeling about your life right now as you're responding to the questionnaire. So the next questionnaire that we collect is Community Integration Questionnaire, CIQ, and we use the social integration subscale. We do not administer the whole questionnaire. This is a classical test theory-based scale. It provides one score. It's been very widely used in general population, but it also has been validated and frequently used in traumatic injury populations, including in burn survivors. The BMS collected this questionnaire from 1993 to 2006. But in 2006, we started collecting just the social integration subscale because the whole questionnaire is very long and we needed to keep the administration time manageable. The CIQ social integration subscale includes 6 items, and they ask about managing finances, activities outside the home, and if you're doing activities alone with others. We collect the CIQ by self-report from youth of 14 to 17. The scoring is simple. It just sums item responses. It doesn't do any transformation of the score. The scores range from 0 to 12, 0 indicating very little or minimal social integration, and 12 excellent social integration. Unfortunately, no general population norms are available, but because a lot of studies use this questionnaire, it may be possible for you to look up the mean from the previous studies of a population. That would be a good comparison to people with burns or other studies you're conducting. Again, it's freely available, and here is the reference if you need to look up more information. And here's what it looks like. So it asks about frequency of doing certain activities. It asks whether activities are done mostly alone, mostly with others, whether a child has a best friend. So that's how social integration is assessed. Another area of health we assess is PTSD symptoms. We use Child PTSD Symptom Scale, CPSS. In 2015, we began assessing PTSD in pediatric participants using this scale. It is a classical test theory-based measure that is also used for clinical diagnosing or clinical screening, and it has well-documented internal consistency and retest reliability. There is no proxy report available for it, so we only collected via self-report, and we administer this scale to children and youth from age 8 up. The scale is available in Spanish and also has been validated in Spanish. As is typical for classical test theory scales, the CPSS is scored by simply summing the item scores, and the possible scores range from 0 to 51. Again, it's freely available if you want to use it. And here's what it looks like. It has 13 items. This is just so that it's better readable. So here are some examples of the items. The time frame is last 2 weeks and goes from, it asks about frequency of experiencing symptoms such as feeling irritable or having fits of anger, having trouble concentrating, being too careful or vigilant, being jumpy or easily startled. Post-traumatic growth is an area that we started assessing in 2015. We were interested in including more domains of positive psychology. The post-traumatic growth assesses the positive outcomes following a traumatic experience. There is an adult version that we also administer in the BMS, and since 2015, we've been administering the pediatric version. There is no proxy version, so this is another example of where we only have self-report and no proxy version. We assess this between ages 8 and 17 via self-report only. Scoring is using a simple summary score. This is the classical test theory developed scale. Higher score equals more post-traumatic growth, so more positive change after the traumatic event. And again, it is free to use. So it looks like this. It has no time frame. And it measures how much change people experience. It asks questions like, I learned how nice and helpful some people can be. I feel closer to other people. I have learned that I can deal with more things than I thought. So it looks at different areas that people may have gained self-efficacy or more confidence in doing things. Now, there are a lot more measures that have historically been used by the burn model systems. We don't have time to go over all of those that are currently not used. If you are considering using BMS pediatric data, it is really important to pay attention to when and for how long these measures were administered, if they were stopped at some point, because obviously the length of administration of a measure affects how much data we have. If we only administer something for 3 years, we have a lot less data than if we administer it for 13. So the data center developed this this table to help you figure out what was administered at what times. And I know this is little and difficult to see, but it gives you the specific domain or question that we were asking, and it shows you for each year when it was administered. And this is for adults. And then we also have the same measure for pediatrics. So if you're considering using our data, this is a very good place to start to look at what was administered, how much data there may be available in our database. We have some limitations in our BMS pediatric data. Most important one is that between 1998 and 2022, most of the pediatric data was collected by one site that was located in Galveston, Texas. As a result of this data collection, majority of pediatric participants were Spanish speaking and were not from the US. They were mainly from Mexico and some from Central American countries. So this sample, the pediatric sample that the BMS has collected, is not representative of the United States pediatric patients. So if that is of consideration, our data may not be suitable for all purposes. And with that, I thank you for your attention. I hand it over to you. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. You can just unmute yourself and talk, or you can put your question in the chat and I'll do my best to respond. Slide 16, concerning point 4, important change. Is it better to report? Okay, let me see.
So Dagmar, this goes
Yes,
to the point
yes.
of, you mentioned for most of them, half a standard deviation, which is 5, is generally considered a clinical meaning difference.
Correct.
Should we always go to healthmeasures.org and see if there is a different measure or a different measure for clinically important changes, or can we always just assume it's 5?
So half a standard deviation is your, like if you have no other information, you use that. So if somebody estimated clinically important difference for the score in a population that is reasonable for your study, use that. If no better estimates of clinically meaningful difference are available, then go ahead and it is well justifiable to use a half standard deviation. Typically, for some domains, we have better estimates than others. So for instance, depression, because it is such an important domain and it is so widely used for screening in clinical practice, we have excellent estimates of what is clinically meaningful change. So for instance, for PROMIS, it is about 4 points. So it's fewer points than 5 points, which would be half a standard deviation. So if that estimate is available, I would use that instead of half a standard deviation.
Thank you. And just so everyone knows, this is the T-score clinically meaningful difference, not the summary score, which you clearly outlined is not to be used.
Correct. It's absolutely not to be used for anything. You're basically using, if you use the sum score, you're using a score that hasn't been validated, and none of the estimates of clinically meaningful change or anything like validity of the score, none of that applies to the sum score.
So Dagmar, if we were reviewing an article that reports on PROMIS measures and they report the raw data, we should recommend in our review that they remove that entirely.
Absolutely. That article, I would write, if it's already been published, I would write to the editor and say, this is not an okay way to use the PROMIS scores. Or if you're reviewing something that hasn't been published yet, I would recommend not publishing the article unless proper scores are used.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Anybody's wondering about anything? Okay, I don't hear any comments, any questions. So thank you so much for coming. Really